Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and there's going to be another wonderful show in store for everyone at home. Hope you all have been hanging in there and staying warm and healthy. I'm getting geared up for this baseball season, which is basically, when you think about it, right around the corner. It's pretty crazy to think about, honestly, but getting into the baseball talk for today and getting into the show, I'm going to get into the typical news and then also do some other division predictions as to where I see certain teams landing in their particular division. So I'll get right into it. And I'll first open things up with some news circulating around the MLB and touching on any and all of the latest free agency updates that are worth sharing. And let me tell you what, after what just broke today, again, I'm recording this on Friday, February 5th. So if we all know what date that is, it's a big day in Dodgers history, so I'm going to touch on that in a bit. But after the news, I'll share some sneaky good free agency pickups that have have really happened over the last few weeks for a couple teams, and I'll discuss what moves they were and how these players can impact their teams in ways people might not notice right now. Later on, I'll get into another division prediction, this time with the NL East, and I'll share where I could see which teams landing once the season is over. And then be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show, as I'll be back in a Buy It or Deny It segment, this time sharing whether or not I buy or deny the idea that Randy Arozarena can come back this year and have similar success he had throughout the playoffs and in the World Series. So we've got a jam-packed show. There's a lot of things to go around and really kind of discuss and touch on and highlight. And so I want to first get into it. Actually, as I stare at my notes, I was going to discuss kind of, because before this, before I started recording and everything else, the latest news I had heard was obviously that it was down to two teams for Trevor Bauer. It was between the Mets and it was between the Dodgers. So I have all this stuff written up about which one he should go to and which is more likely for him to land on. But we all know where he landed. Signed a 3-year, $102 million deal with the LA Dodgers. And, I mean, what else can you say about Dodgers baseball, right? I mean, they say and they do nothing all offseason. They are virtually, I would say, not even quiet. Like, they are literally mute. Like, they are completely silent. No moves being done, no transactions, no trades, nothing. Mind you, there's other teams in the NL, like the Mets, teams like in their same division, the Padres, all going out, making additions, adding to their lineup, and building up for a stronger lineup, supposedly, I would think, to try and go up against a team like the Dodgers, which clearly have a very stacked lineup. And then all of a sudden today, again, as of recording Friday, February 5th, Trevor Bauer signs with the Dodgers. So that's going to be a pretty scary rotation, first and foremost. You've got Bauer, obviously. You've got Kershaw, Julio Urias, who, as we all know, is coming off, I would say, one of the biggest momentum waves out of the World Series next to Randy Arozarena and Corey Seager. Urias was literally a lifesaver for them on the mound. He was basically, I think, the defensive difference in a lot of games. Obviously Betts and obviously Bellinger with a couple huge plays down the stretch in the playoffs. But Urias, in terms of coming up huge with getting outs and just being able to be that clutch player that they needed on the mound, he was exactly that. They also have Walker Buehler. I mean, they've got a serious rotation. And I think, again, it's a team that has made, like I mentioned, no moves, and then all of a sudden they make probably the biggest splash in the entire free agency and went out and got probably, I would say, the most popular free agent, one of the most sought-after free agents, probably the most sought-after free agent, I would say. So definitely a big move on the Dodgers' part, without question, right? And I think that is something that speaks volume to the Dodgers, not only just their team, but I think their culture, the organization, how things are ran from the top down. They don't do anything, I would say, they obviously have a huge payroll, so they can make really big moves like this. But they weren't doing it left and right. Now, I do have to remind myself, they didn't really need to do these kind of crazy, they weren't like the Padres, is I guess what I'm getting at. They didn't make moves and strategically put together a roster like the Padres did this offseason. And so I guess sometimes you might forget how actually good the Dodgers lineup is right now, and it's completely stacked. So they didn't need to go out and make a ton of moves. They didn't need to go out and make a bunch of additions. They re-signed Blake Trinan. They went out and they did get Corey Knebel, which was obviously, I think, a very good move as well. And then obviously you get Trevor Bauer, and you already add to a pitching staff and an entire pitching core that was, if I'm not mistaken, first in team ERA last year. They were first in wins. They were top 5 in strikeouts as a team. So they have a very good pitching core as it is, and you just added the reigning NL Cy Young pitcher of the year in Trevor Bauer, and a guy that had a 1.7 ERA. He was one of 4 guys, and I've said this so many times, one of 4 guys to have 100 Ks or more in the MLB last year. Now, I know that 100 Ks does not sound like much, but when you have 60 games, and then you have to break that down even more because they're pitchers, so they don't play every single day. So he really got about, I would guess, 12, maybe 13 starts, and he had over 100 Ks. That's an absurd amount of Ks to have in a very, very finite amount of games to perform and play in. So this Dodgers team is definitely adding a huge piece to their roster. And I know that a couple weeks ago I had asked, kind of a buy it or deny it, do I think that the Dodgers could repeat? Well, this was, again, before the acquisition of Trevor Bauer. Now that they have him, I don't know. I'd maybe rethink that. I would really have to rethink that because beforehand I was like, they're going to probably lose Justin Turner. They've already lost Kike Hernandez, and they haven't made any other moves. And then they go out and get Trevor Bauer. And it's like, well, they already had all the hitting that they needed. I don't think they needed to do anything crazy there. And then you go and get just an even better pitcher and even another even better pitcher or whatever, and you add that much more depth to your starting pitching, and that's going to be really hard to go up against, And I think that Kershaw and Bauer, in my opinion, are equivalent to how, the Padres have Snell and Darvish now, or however you want to look at who's the 1 and 2, and you could even throw Lamont in there. He might be the one. Who knows? But this Dodgers team, I think, has definitely put themselves back into that conversation of potentially repeating because Bauer could be that big of a difference for them. The one thing that I worry about, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, and I'll move on throughout the rest of the segment, the one thing I worry about, what is his off-field antics going to be like? And I personally think that might have been a reason why he didn't land with the Dodgers, or the Mets, is because they've already had enough off-the-field issues this offseason, obviously, with Jared Porter and everything else. And then now Mikey Callaway also, he's been, in the mix and in the news with all the sexual allegations against him and when he was the Mets manager and so on and so forth. But they probably wanted to move away from that kind of path, if you will, having somebody that could potentially be controversial on their team because they've already had a lot of controversy this offseason, a lot that has circled around their name. I mean, I think this is probably one of the most talked about off seasons that the Mets have been involved in a long time. I haven't heard the Mets named this often in an off season in years. So I think that it was wise that they didn't go in that direction. Plus, they've already went out and spent a lot of money, so they probably don't want to get hit with a luxury tax. So good for the Dodgers. It's good that he's finally landed somewhere because, I mean, it was already long enough, and it was kind of like, why are they dragging this out? Not to mention the guy's making more money than probably 4/5 of the entire Pittsburgh Pirates organization is this year, and really just, I think, the next 3 years as well. But, again, that's besides the point. Now, getting into the rest of the show, getting into everything else, the Twins, they have actually come back into the news. Again, they've still stayed very irrelevant recently as they've gone out and they re-signed Nelson Cruz to a 1-year, $13 million deal. And then they also reached an agreement with Alex Colomé, who was formerly with the White Sox. He's also on a 1-year, $5 million deal. And there's a mutual option included in the 2022 season with a $1.25 million buyout. And let me tell you what. The Twins, again, I was roasting them a couple weeks ago. I know that I was very critical of them. I said that they were very quiet, they weren't doing anything, and they needed to do something, and they needed to act quickly before it got too late. And now they have done that. You get Andrelton Simmons, you get Alex Colomé, and you get Nelson Cruz back. So you just added, I would say, 3 pretty solid pieces back. Not to mention you get Nelson Cruz, who in a little bit I'll discuss later on in the show, but he was literally their only power hitter. He was their only guy other than Luis Arias that was batting above 300 the entire season. He was the only one that had a 900 or more OPS. So the guy clearly was an impactful player. He was only on again, it's only a 1-year deal, but I don't think you can really fairly give a guy a long, lengthy deal when he's 40, 41 years old. You can't say, oh, yeah, we'll sign you for 5 years. That would be, I think, the most moronic thing to do an organization could do, potentially. But getting him back is big. Andrelton Simmons, I think, is a very, very great add for them. I think that he brings a little bit of pop to the lineup. He doesn't have a whole lot of power. He doesn't really have big OPS numbers, but that's why Cruz is there. You get guys like Simmons that can get on base and that they can move around and position themselves correctly, and you can step Nelson Cruz up into the plate and up into the batter's box. He can drive in the runs. He can do the rest, and he's proven that year in and year out in his career. But getting into Alex Colomé, because this is, I think, what was the key move for them. They already had a really, really good bullpen ERA and just an overall great bullpen core last year. They actually had, it was very impressive what they did. They had a below a 3.5 ERA, Alex Colomé has had a below a 3.5 ERA in each of each of his last 5 seasons. But this is a bullpen that has been incredible. I mean, they ranked 3rd in bullpen WAR at 3.5. So this is a guy that I think could really kind of push them over the edge again and get them back to that place, because they did lose a good bit of their core from last year. They did lose a lot of guys during free agency. They lost Sergio Romor. They lost Tyler Clippard, Trevor May, Matt Whistler, all the free agency. So they had to go out and get somebody, and they got somebody that I think is going to be very, very good for them. Again, below a 3.5 ERA in each of the last 5 seasons, and he's never had higher than a 3.94 ERA in his entire career. He had 30 saves in 2019, and let me tell you what, he's been pretty consistent since about 2016. He's had 30-plus saves in 3 of the last 5 years or 4 of the last 5 years. Not to mention this past year, he had 12 saves, I believe, 10 saves. So and again, if Brad Hand led the league with saves in 16, then I think it's very clear that Colomé was right there with him in top tier, closers. He actually ranks 3rd in saves amongst closers since 2016 with 138. He only trails Kenley Jansen and Edwin Diaz. So the guy is clearly a huge add for the Twins, and it's a division that he's familiar with. He's going to be staying in the AL Central, so it's not going to be foreign to him. He's going to be very familiar with the hitters, and not to mention he's going to have a great familiarity with the White Sox hitters as well. So I think that was a great move by the Twins. Overall, they've been doing very, very well with all the moves they've been making, but I want to get out all the free agency news, all the everything else that's been going on. I want to get in some historic news and some things that, again, another great sign that we are progressing forward and that barriers are being broken down when they should be. And recently, this was, again, probably a couple days ago, so not crazy recently, but it was, fairly recent. My favorite team, the Milwaukee Brewers, they came and they decided to hire a female coach to their organization, Sarah Goodrum, and she's going to be the minor league hitting coordinator for the Milwaukee Brewers. So again, another woman to trailblaze into baseball and to really set the foundation for, I think, many generations to come. And she's, again, another woman in baseball that we've recently heard being able to enter into baseball. Kim Ng, she was the one that she was just recently named the general manager of the Miami Marlins. So that was kind of, I think, the beginning of something really great. And it's a great sign that baseball's moving in that direction. They're moving in a more diverse direction. And she's actually been with the team since 2017. She's worked in their sports science and integrative sports performance lab. So she's had her hands in a lot of sort of different analytical, statistical kind of things, behind-the-scenes stuff. She played D1 softball for Oregon. Then she wound up getting her master's from University of Utah in exercise and sports science. So clearly has a great background in this, and she clearly has a surplus of knowledge, not only just with her educational background, but also her playing background, too. That's another big thing. I know people say that softball is different from baseball, and yes, there are some differences, but overall, it's still the same idea. You're hitting a ball that is being thrown at you, and there's still probably similar techniques and probably similar, I would say, statistics and equations and everything else that you can apply to both sports. So, she brings a great background, and the organization felt that she was a great fit. I mean, she had experience working with the hitters in their training facility in Phoenix. And, I mean, Kim Ng actually was quoted after her hiring and saying that it's important for, women in sports, but also women or just sports in general to show and to display this, again, welcoming of more people and being able to allow not just the same old all the time. And really, start to diversify, and again, like I always say, knock down those doors, break down those barriers, and really start to move forward and really progress forward. So I think it's been great. I mean, I talked about earlier in a couple episodes, or a few episodes ago, Bianca Smith, minor league hitting coach for the Red Sox, that was just recently hired a couple months ago. You've got Rachel Fondon. She's a hitting coach for the Cubs and their Arizona League affiliate. Alyssa Natkin, she's an assistant coach on the Giants MLB staff. So we're starting to see women in more prominent roles in baseball, and I mean, I think we've already seen it with Kim Ng being the general manager of an MLB team, and just how much that not only speaks to the Marlins, but baseball and just overall. I think that baseball's going to start getting a different reception, and especially with females wanting to be in the sport, I think that's going to be so important to open the door to everybody. And so I think that's going to be a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be very exciting to see that, just another opportunity for, the sport to grow and just sports in general to grow. So a lot of things going on in baseball recently, all sorts of different signings and this and that and the other. And I think it's kind of, it's exciting because it's getting you geared up, I think, for the season. We are very, very close to spring training. Again, if nothing gets delayed, from what I hear, the MLBPA, I think I mentioned it a couple episodes ago, they rejected the MLB's proposition to try and delay or at least they rejected the proposition by, I believe it was the Arizona League, the Cactus League, I think it's what it's called, down in Arizona. They wanted to push it back, and so the MLBPA said no. So things are still rolling as normal. Spring training is still scheduled to start on time as it was. So we'll have to see, what this baseball season has in store for us, because it's going to be a season like we've never seen before. And I think that, there's going to be definitely some adjustments to be made. There's definitely going to be a lot of new players and then a lot of new faces in the league. But there's also going to be people in important positions that weren't in them before that are going to have that opportunity to be able to showcase what they can do and how they can better teams, organizations, players. And I think that is the most important thing, is that those doors are being opened for many, many more people. But as always, like I like to say, it's also going to be cool to see all of these guys on new teams. I've always loved big free agency off seasons, because then it's kind of, who are the new faces in the new places, and, what do they bring to the table? What do they bring to this new team? So on and so forth. So a lot of fun stuff down the horizon. But, folks, that's going to do it for us in this first segment. Don't go anywhere, because when I get back from the commercial break, I'll jump into highlighting some players that I think were sneaky gets for certain teams and the impact they can have for their new ball clubs. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I dove right into some news going around the league and highlighted some history being made for one team, some free agency signings, one of those teams making a huge free agency signing, and everything in between. But again, be sure to stay right here with me for the final few minutes of the show, as I'll get into my buy it or deny it, discussing whether I buy or deny the idea of Randy Arozarena being able to put up similar success he had in the playoffs and World Series this year in 2021. I want to now get into some sneaky grabs by a couple teams that I think could have some lasting effects for these ball clubs. And now some of these have been more recent than others. Some of them have been a little bit further back. I mean, they're all within the new year, I would say. But some of them I don't think people really realized how big of a get they were, and I think that they could pay off more than people think. So the first guy I want to talk about, and I briefly mentioned him in the first segment, Andrelton Simmons. I mean, this guy I think is going, and I honestly didn't even know how good he was going into it and going into this deal. I looked at his stats and I realized, wow, this guy's again, not a big power guy. He's coming off a solid year, batted .297, but his OPS numbers are not sky high, I would say. But I will say his average, just his overall batting average, is very, very, I would say, steady. He's batted above .270 in 4 of the last 5 years, and 4 years before that, he wasn't able to crack above .270. So he's clearly on, I would say, an upward trend, and he's clearly not, I wouldn't say he's peaked yet, but he's definitely in the right direction, and I think that he could be, again, a player that could be set up to be scored by guys like Nelson Cruz on their team. I think that's going to be kind of their strategy there, plus he's a great glove. And obviously the Angels, they went out and got Jose Iglesias. Simmons was a free agent, so they knew that they had to do something about that. So I think that's going to be a very big piece for them moving forward because honestly, you look at the rest of their lineup and it's nothing stellar. They don't have anybody that I would say really, jumps out at me personally. I would say that there's a couple guys that, obviously you've got Nelson Cruz. Nelson Cruz is going to be your main guy producing, I would say, 80% of your offense. Their pitching is also pretty good too, and I'm going to touch on Alex Colon because I think he's a sneaky get for them because they definitely needed to bolster that bullpen back up, mainly because they lost 4 of their main guys from last year. And that's the problem. If you lose that many guys, that's going to be an issue, and you have to replace that. And you look at their roster. Now, I think they had a lot of guys that just didn't have great years. You look at, for example, Miguel Sano, batted .204. His OPS was .757 average, just right about average. Mitch Garver, though, who I know I've been very high up on, and I think that he could be a really good catcher down the road, batted only .167, and he was coming off a career year, batted above .280. So I think that 2020, again, we have to look at these numbers, I think, in almost an arm's length. We can't look too deep into them because of just the sheer small sample size that we have. And again, for the guys that even had great years last year, who knows what they're going to do in 2021. That's why I'm touching on Randy Arozarena in the final segment, because we don't know if he's going to actually be the type of player that he was. He might have just peaked very quickly and very rapidly, and that might be it. Who knows? I do hear good things about Josh Donaldson because he seemed to have had some better strides last year. Again, his numbers don't really speak of that, but he had an 842 OPS, a 131 OPS plus. He was actually second on the team in OPS plus behind none other than Nelson Cruz. So clearly the power numbers are there for Donaldson. I know he is getting a little bit up in age, but somebody that I think nobody really pays attention to and didn't have a great year last year, but the year before that had a very good year, Jorge Polanco. And I really like Polanco. I think that he's a great bat at shortstop. But then you go into the pitching, we'll stay with the hitting right now because Simmons. But again, I'll touch on the pitching later because of Alex Colon. So 2 guys that just recently got added to the Twins are going to be on this list. But again, you look around the rest of that lineup, they didn't have anybody else besides, again, Luis Urias and Nelson Cruz that batted above 300. Everybody else was 260 and below. So you insert Andrelton Simmons right there. Now, I don't know what they're going to do with Jorge Polanco because he plays short, and he's been, I would say, a proven player in his own right. So they're going to have to do some juggling around. They're going to have to figure out because they can't really move him over to third because that's where Donaldson is. Now, maybe they could move him over to second. They'd have to play around with a couple things. So we'll have to see. But I think Simmons is definitely going to be a bat that they need in their lineup ultimately. So that's one guy that I think is going to have a huge, huge payoff for his team this year. And now I want to get into Marcus Semien. Marcus Semien, I think, is secretly going to be one of the best pickups and one of the, I think, most slept-on players that was picked up in the offseason, in the entire offseason. Semien is coming off of, 2 years removed from being voted, for finishing third in MVP voting. That's not too shabby. Guy had almost a 9 WAR. He had incredible statistics, and he batted .285 that year, 33 homers, 92 RBIs. Come on, right? That's pretty impressive if you ask me. Now, he only had one other year where his homers were 20 and over, but he's clearly capable of that production. He has shown that. He seems to be very capable of it. I just think that, he needed to be added to a team like the Blue Jays. I don't know if the Athletics are really going anywhere. I think that they can be kind of the ceiling team. It's a team that's just going to continuously run into the ceiling, and their ceiling is not very high. But I think the Blue Jays can actually surpass teams like that because they've gone out and spent money this offseason. And I think bringing in Semien, he's that piece that's going to balance them out overall because you bring in guys like Springer, you want to try and bring in somebody else that could be seen as almost, hey, we can't forget about him too. We got to take a little bit of our attention away from Springer because this guy's capable of knocking in 30-plus homers. It's not out of the question for Semien. Not to mention he has a pretty good glove. So my biggest thing is, what are they going to do in the infield, right? I think that they could probably put him at third. That's what I would do because, again, Travis Shaw, not there. Bo Bichette at shortstop, you're not going to take him out of the lineup. Kevin Biggio, not going to take him out of the lineup. And Vlad Jr., you're not going to take him out of the lineup. So I would put Semien over at third. I think it would fix a lot of their issues. He can clearly play third. And I think that overall, that's going to be a good lineup. That's going to be a really, really good lineup. And I think that if they can maybe add, I don't know if they can really add any more pieces, though, because I feel like they're getting to that spending threshold. But if they're able to do that, they can get a lot of good, I mean, they can maybe go out and get another pitcher or so. I know that they were pretty active with getting guys for their bullpen and their starting rotation, but they could maybe get one more. So, I mean, who knows, right? We'll have to see. We'll have to see. But that's another sneaky one. I really like Marcus Semien going over to the Blue Jays. Not to mention, I think the Blue Jays are a team that are looking for guys like that. And I think that they, guys that are going to be able to, not necessarily superstars. Now, Semien, I think, has superstar capability, but they're looking for guys that are going to fit the role. They're going to fit the kind of mold that they have, and it's going to kind of be like, all right, this guy can take us to the next level. He's not going to be the main guy. I think George Springer is going to be kind of that main guy, but I think that he's going to be a guy that can really push them in the right direction as well, kind of give them that added, momentum, if you will. So that's one guy. That's another guy I want to talk about. Then getting into the next one, Jock Peterson. I think that the Cubs honestly kind of just swapped out guys, him for Kyle Schwarber. Essentially, they're not too dissimilar of players. They're both big, power-hitting, outfielders, not great strikeout numbers. I mean, pretty high strikeout numbers if you ask me, and not big average guys, but they produce a lot of runs and they have a lot of power. I will say he's never had a season batting above 250, but he's had at least 20 homers and more in 4 of the 7 seasons he's played. So clearly, I mean, if you're hitting 80-plus homers in 4 seasons, that's pretty, I would say, substantial. That's a pretty solid pace to be hitting home runs. Now, you look at the Cubs lineup. They only had 2 players in the lineup this past year with an 800-plus OPS. And Peterson's OPS has been 800 or higher in 3 of the last 5 years. So that tells you, again, another thing about this team. They are lacking in that power department. And I know that this Cubs team is depleting pretty quickly, and I think that maybe they just wanted to fill an open spot in the outfield and said, hey, it's a 1-year deal. I think it's worth $7 or $8 million. So you can't really get too excited if you're the Cubs. And honestly, I think that eventually they are going to definitely start losing guy after guy. I mean, guys are going to start going to free agency. People are going to start getting traded. We've already seen a little bit of a glimpse into that so far. And so I wonder if anything's going to come of having Peterson around. Is he going to just be there kind of, a rent-a-player for a year and then he's gone? But I think that in this 1 year, and I feel bad for the guy now that I think about it, because the Cubs are not in a win-now mentality, I feel. I don't think that they're in that stage of the game. Maybe they are, but I don't see it. Why would you get rid of essentially your ace pitcher and then get rid of a guy that in 2019 had a career season with 32 home runs and 90-some RBIs and batted .258, which was all career highs for him? Why would you do that? So I think that obviously they probably had some financial things they wanted to figure out, but I feel bad for Peterson because I think he should be on a contending team, because I think he can make a lot of contending teams way better. And if you look at just his power numbers and what he does for you run production-wise, he can bring a lot to the table. Again, not a great fielder. He's going to strike out a lot. But that's kind of the MO for a lot of home run hitting guys. They're going to strike out a lot because they've got big swings and they're going to try and swing for the fence. So I think that this is going to be kind of interesting to see how he meshes into this Cubs kind of roster and the whole chemistry and whatnot. We'll see if he does anything special. I don't really know. But I think that ultimately Peterson could have a good year in Chicago, but I don't know if it's going to do anything drastic for that team. I think that it's going to be good for him overall, but I think that his team, not so much. Now, next guy, Chris Archer. And this is an interesting one because Archer has not been very good the last 2 years. Very injury-ridden, and he was really the subject of arguably one of the worst trades in Pirates history, by far, I would say. He is a 2-time All-Star, so you're bringing him back to where he had some of his best years in baseball. He's coming back to Tampa Bay. I think that the Rays were smart to go get him because they clearly need pitching, right? You've lost Blake Snell. You've lost Charlie Morton. You still have Tyler Glasnow. Yes, you've now also lost Aaron Loop, so you're starting to lose, Jose, Alvarado. He's also gone, so you've lost some guys out of the bullpen. You've lost some guys as starters. You needed to fix those very, very quickly occurring holes in the wall that you had. You needed to patch them up before things exploded. I will say Chris Archer, again, has not been much of, anything substantial recently, but he did have year after year where he was putting up 200-plus Ks. In 2015, he had 252, and then in 2016, he had 233, and then in 2017, he had 249. So right there, that's telling you something about the guy. He's clearly got high strikeout numbers, and he's got the capability of being that efficient pitcher that can get in and out of innings. But he does give up a lot of home runs. And I kind of relate it to a basketball player who can either just airball or swish threes. It's one of the two. He can either strike out 7 guys or he can give up 5 home runs. It's one or the other. But bottom line, they needed pitching. That was the major thing that they needed. And he's not a great winning pitcher. I think that also speaks volume. Again, records for pitchers are a little bit misleading because sometimes you have to look at the teams that they were on and how much run support they were getting that night. He did lead the league one year when he was with the Rays in losses. He had about 19 losses one year. And he's had double-digit losses many times. He's only had 3 years with double-digit wins. And his ERA has really been kind of all over the place between 3.2 and a 4.3, but this past year was at a 5.1. So I don't know if they're getting him at the right time in his career, but in all honesty, it was a wise move for the Rays because they needed to fill that void. And I think maybe he revitalizes his career. He could clearly have kind of the same effect that a lot of these former Pirates guys have. I don't know what it is, but they just leave Pittsburgh, and they all of a sudden have an incredible career from then on. You look at Austin Meadows and Tyler Glasnow, 2 guys that are on the Rays. Now you're bringing in another guy. The Pirates love trading with the Rays. I don't know what it is. And then you also got guys like Garrett Cole. Who knows what it is? I don't know. I mean, Jamison Tyone, he's going to be another guy to kind of watch and see how he does this year. But I think Archer is a sneaky get for them because it's only a 1-year deal, $6.5 million. And, you know, I think maybe the Pirates just got lucky with that point in time of his career. Maybe it was kind of an injury-ridden period. He's getting out of it, and maybe he's going to start fresh in Tampa Bay all over again. And who knows? He clearly had a lot of success in Tampa Bay before. Maybe he can repeat that, and if he can, it'll be interesting to see where their team goes. But I really like Chris Archer over in Tampa Bay now. Getting into a last couple guys, Colton Wong. And this is an interesting get for my Brewers. I really like this, but at the same time, I'm a little skeptical. I hate to say that because obviously as a big Brewers guy, I'm going to love like any move that they make. But this has been clearly the best move that they've made because they haven't really made many other moves. And I'm not totally sold on Wong yet. He's a great fielder. He's a phenomenal fielder, a 2-time Gold Glover, but he's been pretty up and down as a hitter. And I think that is where the Brewers needed to address. They needed to address that lack of hitting. I mean, they were the 26th ranked batting average, and then they were 24th in total RBIs. So right there, that's telling you something about this team. They really, really, really needed hitting. Their pitching was solid across the board. They had some pleasant surprise performances from guys like Corbin Burns. And then obviously you had Devin Williams winning, a lot of awards and being nearly shut down the entire year. But this is a 2-year deal. So I wonder what this is going to maybe catapult into in 2 years. There's an option, I think, on the 3rd year. But he did have a career high with a .285 batting average twice in a 3-year span from 2017 to 2019. So he is on kind of an upwards trend. I will give him that. He's definitely on the up and up in his career. But I just don't know if he's the hitting that they need. They need a guy next to Christian Yelich that's going to do a lot of damage. And I don't know if Avisail Garcia is that quite yet. Ryan Braun's not there anymore. I don't know what to think of Ben Gamel. I mean, 1 year he's great, the next year he's not so great. I just don't know. And you kind of look at the middle infield. Keston Hiura has shown, bright spots here and there. Orlando Arcia, I would say he's more of kind of just a clutch hitter. He's not really, I would say, a consistent hitter. He's just come up in the clutch a lot of times. But they needed somebody to balance out with Christian Yelich. And I just don't know if Colton Wong is going to be somebody that is going to take that attention away from Yelich because, Yelich is a former MVP. And maybe they brought in Wong with this idea of, that he could maybe take some of the pressure off of Yelich and other teams would have to focus in on him. But it's also probably part of his glove. I mean, again, he's got a great glove. He's a very, very good fielder, and I think that has got a lot to do with it as well. Overall, I don't hate the move, and I think it could be actually really good for Wong because I think he was kind of stuck in a little rut in St. Louis, and I think that he's on a new team, he's on a new market, so that might bring attention to him. I mean, I don't know if people really realize this, but when you get traded and you go to a new team, especially within the division, and you've made some noise before, I feel like there's a little bit more of a spotlight on you because there's been that news that you were traded, and again, that's kind of that breaking news, big trade being made, whatever. And if you've made any sort of a name for yourself, I think that going into that next year, people are going to say, all right, I'm paying attention to this guy. I'm locked in because he got traded, and I want to see how he does with his new team. So I think a lot of eyes will be on Wong this year, and I think that he could have a really good year. I think that it's, again, I don't want to jump to, conclusions or anything, because I still want to see how he does at the plate. If he does great at the plate, I'm going to be a happy camper. If he's just a great fielder and he doesn't really do anything for us offensively, I'm going to kind of scratch my head and say, what was the point of this? And we have him for 2 years now. So, and again, you don't know what's going on with Lorenzo Cain, if he's going to play or not this year. He opted out in the middle of the year last year. So who knows with that, right? So a lot of uncertainty with the Brewers, but I think it was a good move for them to get Wong. I don't necessarily hate it. I wouldn't say I'm absolutely thrilled about it, but I would say I like it overall. I'm going to be optimistic. So the last two guys I've already touched on briefly in the first segment. I'll go over them again. Nelson Cruz and Alex Colomé, both being picked up by the same teams. I mean, plain and simple, Cruz is the bat that they need, and Colomé is the arm that they need out of the bullpen. They needed a back-end reliever after all the guys that they lost in free agency. They needed a guy that's going to come in and be an effective closer. I mean, he's never had an ERA over 4 in his entire career for a season. And he's had 30-plus saves in 3 of the last 5 seasons. That's a pretty staggering statistic, if you ask me, especially if the guy is that consistent with 30 saves. And this was a top-tier bullpen, and now they're adding back to it with Colomé. And then Cruz brings so much offense with him. And again, I already touched on it, their lineup. I feel like I'm a broken record talking about the Twins, but I haven't talked much about them this offseason. And I think now we're going to be seeing a little bit more. Again, they're making these moves closer to the season. And I think that ultimately they were 3 moves that they needed to make. I don't know if they're going to obviously be World Series contenders. They can maybe make the playoffs, sure. But again, they've had that streak of losing in the playoffs for, 18 years or whatever it is? So clearly, I'm hoping that they're making moves that can maybe break that streak. Colomé does bring experience. He brings late inning experience. He's somebody that's been in the league for a while. And then Cruz obviously brings a lot of experience. But I think that they also need to hope, and they're hoping, that they get better performances from guys like Mitch Garver, from guys like Miguel Sano, that can maybe pick up the slack a little bit so Nelson Cruz isn't kind of standing out amongst everybody else, and everyone's like, okay, well, we just have to focus on him, and that's it. Nobody else is really doing much. When other guys are starting to get involved, and when other guys are starting to do different things and start to produce, then you take the attention off of Cruz. But again, if they did not re-sign him, there would have been a massive hole to fill because they would not have had any power hitting at all. Maybe Sano, but that would be it in my opinion. And then getting Colomé, that was just kind of, I think, a necessity. They had already lost 4 guys in the bullpen, so I think it was just smart for them to go out and patch those holes up and figure it out. So ultimately, really excited to see how these guys perform and kind of where they land. And, obviously we still have a couple guys, I think, to figure out in the free agency market. But there's a lot of different moving pieces, a lot of guys on some new teams. And I'm just really excited to see how they perform on their new teams. Like I mentioned, when you're, I think, in the middle of being traded and then coming into that following season, I think people are paying a little bit more attention to you because you were in that kind of, in that breaking news in the middle of things, if you will. But ultimately, it's going to be a great season. I'm excited. I know things are a little weird this year, but really pumped to see some of these guys, especially see how the Twins kind of perform with these recent adds that they've made. But that's going to close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial, I'm going to get into, yet again, another prediction of a division, as this time I'll be predicting the NL East and who I think will be the victor in the East. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and in the previous segment, I got right into sharing which free agent pickups I think are sneaky gets for certain teams and shared what I think some of these players can do for their new teams. I want to now get into another prediction of a division, and this time I want to get into the NL East because the NL East might be one of the most stacked divisions in all of baseball with all of the adds that these teams have made in the last couple months and really the last couple weeks, I would say. So getting into it, I'm going to start from 5 and work my way down to 1. Coming in at number 5, I'm going to have to go with the Marlins. I hate to do that, but I just don't think that they're at that point quite yet to be a playoff contending team. Yeah, they finished second last year, but let's face it, they didn't play a full 162-game season. Who knows what would have happened after Game 60, after Game 70, even after Game 80, right? I would say it was probably, I don't want to say a fluke, but I think they were just kind of the beneficiary of, again, a shortened season. It's very interesting, too. Them and the Blue Jays were the only playoff teams with negative run differentials and made the playoffs. And they had a losing record against teams with a 500 winning percentage or higher. So, again, a lot of teams in this division, I think, could be in that kind of general ballpark, and I think that could pose a lot of problems for them. I don't think that they've got the depth. I don't think that they've got the talent necessarily right now to match up with some of these other teams that are higher payrolls. They are larger markets. They make a little bit of more money. So I think that this is going to be a team that isn't really ready right now, but maybe down the road. Their roster isn't half bad, though. I mean, they did get Starling Marte at the trade deadline, but his numbers dropped, I would say, from upwards of 360 when he was with the Diamondbacks. He was batting right around there, and then all the way down to 245 after he made it to Miami. So right there, that tells me a lot of things. Clearly did not, when he got to Miami, something happened. Who knows? It might have just, I don't know, went on a little bit of a slump. That's part of baseball. But what does stand out to me is the pitching. I think that the pitching could be something to really build around because they've got a lot of young guys that are really, really good pitchers. And I think that they, again, they could, if they wanted to, I think that, I don't know. I think that they could compete with some teams. Sure, I think their pitching could stack up with some of this formidable hitting. I mean, it's going to be a lot of high strikeout players in the league with, Schwarber, Bell, so on and so forth. So I think, Pete Alonso, I think that there could potentially be, some bright spots. Sixto Sanchez, I think, is going to be a major piece for them. He's going to be one of those big bright spots for them in the long run. I just think that this team is just continuously trying to rebuild over and over and over and over again. And I just don't know at what point is it going to stop. When are they going to find that player that's going to take them to the next level? I think that it could be Sanchez. I think that Sixto Sanchez could definitely be that guy, but they're going to need some offense. They're going to need some hitting around him. Kim Ng, I think, is going to really revamp this lineup. I mean, Derek Jeter is also very involved as a former player. So I think that, and he's part of ownership. So I think they can really strategize and build this team. And there's a lot of experience between the two of them in the baseball world. So I think that the both of them can get it done. I think Ng is going to have a huge part of this. And honestly, I could see them maybe being a playoff team in a couple years. Again, they're not there right now. They don't have necessarily, I would say, the depth, the talent, the experience, any of that to really be a team that can, I think, make a playoff run, go the distance, go the length. So they're coming in at number 5 for me. Coming in at number 4, and this is going to pain me to say this because I think that the Phillies have done a really nice job the last couple weeks, but it's the Phillies. I think it's just because, and honestly, these next 4 teams, you could rearrange them in so many different ways. There's probably a multitude of ways that you could come up with different probabilities and, different outcomes of how these next 4 teams, I would say, are going to play out. I would say the Phillies did make a lot of moves that they were supposed to do. They were supposed to go out, I would say, and go get some bullpen pitching. They clearly did that. Jose Alvarado, adding Archie Bradley, getting 2 solid arms, I would say, that are going to be able to, I think, breathe some life and kind of be a breath of fresh air for this bullpen that was the worst bullpen in 90 years in baseball. I mean, they literally had one of the worst bullpen ERAs in the last 90 years. That's pretty staggering if you ask me. You go out and re-sign JT Realmuto, you go and get Didi Gregorius. I think that is a very, very good thing. Obviously, they needed to bring those 2 bats back because, hey, they were part of the reason why they were tied for 8th in team ERA or team average last year, and they were also 11th in team home runs. And 5 of their 9 starters had double-digit home runs, and 4 of those 5 knocked in 30-plus RBIs. And both of those players were Realmuto and Gregorius, so they were a huge part of this team. Now, back to the pitching, though, Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler. I think are both very legitimate frontmen. I mean, you look at their rotation, they both had below a 3.5 ERA, and they were the only ones that threw 70 innings or more. And the next closest was Zach Eflin with 59 innings. So they're going to really rely on those two guys. I just don't know if the rest of the starting pitching is going to get it done. Can the rest of the starting pitching fill in where they're supposed to, or is it going to kind of be this really relying on the hitting, hoping that the bullpen can get them out of jams, this, that, and the other, because they can only go so far with the pitching rotation. They don't have any experience. You know, they're losing Jake Arrieta, and honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. Arrieta hasn't really done much in the last couple years. He's aging, and I think that he's kind of on, again, the tail end of his career. So I think they need to go out maybe down the road eventually and get some pieces that can, you know, bring some experience, bring some veteran leadership, especially for the pitchers, because they don't really have any, I would say, veteran starting pitchers that are going to really take, you know, Wheeler and Nola under their arms and try and say, hey, we're going to groom you into the starters that we know you can become. The main question for me in this Phillies team is, can their pitching just hold up? Can their pitching hold up the whole way through, and can their hitting stay consistent? Bryce Harper had a great first half of the season. Then he all of a sudden kind of just plateaued and kind of went on a downward spiral after that. So it's going to be, can they go and play an entire season through? Can they be successful the entire season through? And can the pitching hold up the entire season through? And if those questions are all answered with a yes, then maybe they're not a fourth seed or coming in fourth place in the NL East. Maybe they're a number 2 team. Maybe they're even a number 1 team. But again, I'm going to get through the last 3 teams because I think that there's other teams in front of them that have a little bit more than they do, but I think the Phillies are not too far behind. I think they definitely gained some ground with the moves that they made. So coming in at number 3, I've got the Nationals, and this is a team that really fell on hard times last year, obviously coming off a World Series win, and then you've got this pandemic, you've got 60 games, probably really hard to kind of get into any sort of rhythm, right? They had the worst run differential in the entire division. They had one of the worst in all of baseball, but they didn't have a ton of help outside of Soto and Turner. That was the big thing. Juan Soto and Trey Turner, you know, combined contributed to about 75% of their offense. The rest of the team was dismal. I mean, they were literally non-existent. And they were, honestly, this is what's kind of interesting to me, and I didn't really realize this. They weren't that bad in close games, oddly enough. They were only 7-9 in one-run games. And so I think that you add that depth and you add a little bit, you know, more of a dynamic lineup to that, then you could potentially have yourself a team that, you know, can make that World Series run again. They went out and they got Josh Bell. They went out and got Kyle Schwarber. Do I think that those guys are pieces that are going to take them over the edge and to the next level? No, not at all. I do not see that happening at all. But I do see them potentially slowly climbing their way back up there over time. The one thing that I am kind of worried about, though, is the health of the pitching. Scherzer battled injuries all of last year for the most part. Steven Strasburg has had his fair share of health problems. And I think that if they can just go out and get, again, one more piece. A lot of these teams, I feel, are one piece away from being that difference. There's a very few teams, I think, that are very complete. You know, obviously the Dodgers. I think even the Yankees have got a couple holes in their lineup. The Mets are fairly, I mean, and even the Padres. Those are 3 teams. You know, maybe I would throw in the White Sox too. You know, those are 4 teams that I think are fairly well-rounded. And I think the Nationals, they need somebody at third base. Getting somebody like Justin Turner would do wonders to their lineup. Carter Kaboom is not really doing it for them. Batted nearly just 200 last year. Same thing the year before. Now, he hasn't had a whole lot of service time. I will give him that. He hasn't had a whole lot of time up in the majors. But at the same time, if you're trying to make moves like you just made with Kyle Schwarber and Josh Bell, you're clearly showing to people that you're trying to not necessarily go all in, but you're trying to make a here and now case. I mean, they gave up 2 of their top pitching prospects for Josh Bell. So they want to win, I think, maybe not now, but at least in the next 2 years. That's what they plan on doing. I just don't know if they can squeeze out 2 really good years out of Scherzer and Strasburg anymore. So I wonder if their pitching, if their health is going to hold up. But I think that it's good that they went out. They got some other hitting to surround Soto and Turner, so not everybody is focusing in on them. And I think it's going to do wonders for Turner and Soto's career. It's going to do wonders for Schwarber and Bell's career and the entire team. I think the whole team's going to benefit from this. So I honestly really, really like where the Nationals are going. I definitely think that there are still some pieces that need to be figured out for the most part. But I think ultimately this is going to be a good team this year. I'm excited to watch them. I'm excited to see what's going on in the nation's capital. And I think that if they can play their cards right and if guys can stay healthy, then I think it's going to be a good year. Also, you have to mind the strikeouts. That's going to be another thing. They've added a lot of guys to their lineup that are big and high-volume strikeout guys, hitting-wise. And that's not a good strikeout volume to have. Not the same as a pitcher. Schwarber, Bell, both very strikeout-prone hitters. Soto, he does have a tendency, but honestly, as somebody as young as he is, he's very patient at the plate. And I've been very impressed with his patience, and it's kind of improved. The first year, he was a little jumpy in the box, kind of reaching for some balls that he shouldn't reach for. But as time has gone on, and I think playing in that World Series so early on gave him a world of experience. I think that is going to do wonders for him down the road in his career. Being able to have that, he can now build on his own personal legacy, but also continue to strive for that World Series. He knows what it takes. He's been there. He's got that experience, and he can go to really any team moving forward. And, looking at his career as a whole down, in the entirety of it, he can down the road go to maybe another team and bring that experience with him. So I think this Nationals team is on the verge of something special, but I don't know if it's necessarily this year. But it's definitely in a very recent time frame. If they can maybe, and again, they got Brad Hand. So now you're starting to kind of bring that depleted bullpen back to life a little bit. Sean Doolittle having some issues with injuries. I'm not quite sure. I don't think he's with the team anymore. I believe he's a free agent, or at least he got traded. He's not with the Nationals anymore, so they needed a closer. And you bring in the guy that led the league in saves last year. Great move by the Nationals. So ultimately, I like what things and kind of where things are going with the Nationals overall. But then again, getting into my last two, the Braves. I think that they're going to come in second. I know that kind of sounds a little crazy considering the fact that they came in first place last year and they went to the NLCS. They were really one win away from going to the World Series. It's kind of crazy to think about. But here's my thing. How much are they going to miss Marcell Ozuna, right? Are they going to be able to re-sign Marcell Ozuna? I know that they've been linked to a couple big-time free agents, but I don't know if they're going to land there. I think it's just a little crowded in Atlanta, and what I mean by this is there's a lot of really good players on that team, and so as a result, it's like, why are we having to add any more? I think it's just a matter of the players performing. Ronald Acuna, I think if he's not already there, he's a year away from, or maybe this is the year where we see how good we've already seen him hit 40 home runs in a season, and he's under 25. So they've already got that youthful talent. Ozzie Albies, the same thing. Dansby Swanson, I think he's right there on the verge of having a breakout season. And then they go out and add some veteran pitching who also have, a little bit of winning experience in the World Series in Charlie Morton. And that's what they missed last year. Think about it. If they had Morton on their team in that NLCS, they might have been in the World Series. We might be having a different conversation about who won that World Series. It might not be the Dodgers. As crazy as that sounds, the Dodgers were literally one game away from going back to L.A., and I think that the Braves were smart to go out and address that need. I just don't know how much or what is going to be missed of Marcell Ozuna because, he was their leading home run hitter. He was their leading RBI guy, batted .338, had a staggering OPS, over 1,000 OPS, and in my opinion, I think he was an MVP finalist in all regard. I think he was that good this year. And I don't know. I think that, being on a team with Freddie Freeman, it was probably going to be hard because Freeman has proven himself time and time again. So, I can understand that. But this team overall, they were very good last year. Not even in the playoffs, just overall. They had a winning record both on the road and at home. They were 24-16 against division opponents. So a pretty, that's a, right there, that's an 8-game kind of difference in terms of how, much they're winning, as opposed to they were only 11-9 in interleague play. So they clearly do well against their division opponents, and I think that's why it's going to stand out, in this season. But again, I just don't know if they have enough to compete with the Mets. So I don't know. We'll have to see. It's going to be very, very interesting nonetheless. I think that the Braves should also try and unload Markakis. I feel like at this point, he's kind of a waste of space, and I think that would be the one thing I would do. Get Markakis out of there, and I hate to say that. The guy's 37, though, and I know he was very productive not too long ago, but he still isn't what they need. I think that this is a young team with some experience and very, very talented players, and so I think that they need to kind of fix their overall roster in that kind of regard. And so we'll have to see if that's going to happen. I am very hopeful for the Braves. I could honestly see them winning it still. I just don't know if it's going to be as big of a kind of runaway. I mean, it wasn't even a runaway last year because the Marlins were not that far behind them. But I don't know if it's going to be kind of how it was last year, where it was a clear separation between the Braves and then everybody else. Now I think a lot of these teams have elevated themselves to the level of the Braves. And because the Nationals, after 2019, they lost a lot of people. The Mets, I don't think that they were as experienced as they are now. You get another guy, or, obviously adding Lindor, and you're adding, Carlos Carrasco, you add James McCann, so on and so forth. Tons of weapons. They weren't there last year. You look at teams like the Phillies, I think that they were still trying to figure themselves out. Now everybody is kind of caught up to the Braves, and so that's why I think it's going to be very, very tight and a very competitive division this year, arguably the best in my opinion. But getting into the final team, as we all know, I'm going to go with the Mets. Yes, I know it may be, kind of a typical answer because everyone's like, oh, they're going to probably be the best team in the NL or be one of the best teams in the NL. They added this, they added that, Yes, it's generic, but I can see why people are going in that direction. They added James McCann, and I think that was very smart on their part, first and foremost, because when they were in the talks of getting Real Muto, the price was just too high. It was way too high. And so that is my issue with that. And I knew that from the beginning. I was like, if they go and get him, they're not going to be able to spend much more. They go and get McCann. He's an all-star. He's somebody that batted a career-high 289 from the plate in 2020. And again, he's coming off a year where he had to kind of share that duty behind the plate with Yasmani Grandal. So that's another thing. So that's a big upgrade from Ramos for the Mets. They also get Lindor. They added Carlos Carrasco. They bring back Marcus Stroman. Noah Syndergaard is supposedly going to be coming back at some point this year after his Tommy John surgery. And then you've already got guys like Michael Conforto, Dominic Smith, Pete Alonso, J.D. Davis. Jeff McNeil, who I think is going to play a crucial role on this team. And then you also throw in Jacob deGrom. Over the last 3 years, he's won 2 Cy Youngs. He's been one of the best, if not the best pitchers in baseball over the last 3 years. No question about it. And if they can get everybody healthy, and if everybody can stay healthy, this is going to be a scary team. Now, why I bring in Jeff McNeil is because he's very talented and he can play a lot of different positions. With Cano being suspended this year, they're going to need somebody over there to fill that void. It would minimize the amount of moving around they'd have to do in the field, because you could obviously keep guys like Conforto, and you could also keep guys like J.D. Davis, and then you bring in guys like Dominic Smith. That's your outfield. And then your infield can be Lindor, it can be, Jeff McNeil, Pete Alonso, so on and so forth. You can do a lot of different things with this lineup, and so that's why I think this is a very unique team, because Jeff McNeil can be used in a multitude of ways. Now, obviously, if I'm not mistaken, J.D. Davis does go over to third base sometimes, so there's a lot of different things that you can do with this lineup. I think that's why this team's so unique. You can play around with all sorts of positions because there's a couple guys that are really good, and they're utility players. I mean, if you go on Baseball Reference, Dominic Smith is listed as a utility player. The guy can play everywhere, and he batted .316 this year. So, you tell me. I think that's a player that you're going to want to have not only in your lineup hitting-wise, but also fielding-wise, and you can put him anywhere. I mean, that's incredible. I think that's such a versatile thing to have as a baseball player. So that's my order. I'm going to go Mets, then Braves, and then Nationals, Phillies, and Marlins. That's my prediction. We'll see how it goes. I could honestly see that being a variety of things, but the last thing I could see it being I could not see the Marlins finishing anything higher than 4th place. I could not see them finishing in the top 3. If they do, I would absolutely be flabbergasted, and I don't know what I would do, but I'm very, very confident that won't happen. But nonetheless, I think it's going to be a fun division to watch, and I think that eventually the Marlins can get to that level. It's just going to take them a little bit of time. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. Stay right there, because we'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, which will feature another Buy It or Deny It segment, where I will discuss whether I buy or deny the fact that Arozarena could potentially have the same amount of success he had in the playoffs last year in the regular season this year. So don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in the previous segment, I shared my prediction for the NL East this year and mentioned which teams I could see finishing where throughout the entire NL East. I want to now finish the episode with another buy it or deny it segment discussing whether I buy or deny the idea of Randy Arozarena having similar success that he had this season and in the playoffs in particular and the World Series, and he's going to have that same similar success this upcoming year in 2021. So it's an interesting concept because here's why. Randy Arozarena is honestly, when you think about it, he's a very interesting case because he really kind of just bursted onto the scene right during the playoffs. So he played about 23 games leading up into the playoffs, and there were 60 games, so he played about a third of the season. And again, mind you, he didn't even play the first two-thirds of it. So he didn't actually play well into just about August. And so then he had about a month or so, and then he got into the playoffs. And again, the playoffs is a heavy time of baseball to play. I mean, that's intense. That's very, every single error is going to be very, very, the margin of error is going to be very slim, very, very slim if you're going to want to move on and move forward. Teams clearly showed that during the playoffs, throughout the entire playoffs. You had teams like the Braves, had very, very, very small margins of error, and all of a sudden the Dodgers come back and they win. So Randy Arozarena really kind of becomes a household name during the World Series and the playoffs, and he set numerous records. He had the record for the most hits in, I think, an entire playoffs, the most hits by a rookie in the entire playoffs. I think he set another home run record. He set numerous records, and I felt like every single day he was setting a new one. But again, back to the original point, can he follow up with this success this year? And can he do it again and again and again? He hasn't even put together an entire full season of baseball. He's played 19 games in his first year in 2019 for the St. Louis Cardinals, and then he played 23 games this past year for the Tampa Bay Rays. So he's played 42 games in total, not even technically enough to get him to the All-Star break. The All-Star breaks are usually around 80 or so games. So he's halfway to the All-Star break, and he's had, pretty good numbers, I would say. When he was with Tampa Bay, he batted .281 of those 23 games, and then in those 19 games with the Cardinals, he batted .300. So clearly he did some damage. He did a pretty good job from the plate. But I don't know if it can follow up through, the entire way through, because he hasn't had that experience and that he hasn't had that kind of, I would say, kind of a habitual way or kind of just that constant routine of playing baseball over and over again, day in and day out, 6-7 times a week throughout an entire season, not just 23 games. He hasn't experienced going through that entire season grind, playing late in July, late into August, getting into September, that he hasn't experienced that. So I don't know if he's going to be able to withstand an entire season grind and put up the numbers that he's been putting up. Now, I do think that he's capable of being a very good baseball player in the long run. If you look at his numbers, his OPS numbers are through the roof. He had an .891 OPS his first year, a 1.022 in his second year. So clearly, he had a jump just right there. And again, he only played about 4 games there's only a difference of 4 games that he played from one year to the next. But, still, that's a huge jump if you ask me. So I think that, and when you watch him play, too, he's got a great swing. He's got great timing. He's not great with off-speed pitches, but again, I think that's a kind of a common denominator amongst a lot of young baseball players. He's 25 years old, so he's got plenty of time to mature, get better, get used to, and kind of get into a routine of major league pitching. And I do think that he's got a very bright future ahead of him. Not to mention, he's a pretty good fielder, and he plays with a lot of heart. He plays with a lot of hustle. And I think that's what I really like about him. He's the type of guy that will stretch a single into a double if he's able to. And I like players like that because they're willing to take risks. And as a result, I think that is what can take teams like the Tampa Bay Rays to the next level. They can make teams that are probably on paper not the greatest, really good teams, because guys like Randy Arozarena are making plays like that are going to stretch innings, they're going to stretch games, and they're going to stretch plays from a single into a double and make it challenging and make the defense make a play. So, I mean, if you look at his, again, his numbers overall and just what he did in the playoffs, I mean, the playoffs is what really spoke to me, because he had a couple games where it was like, I mean, every single at-bat, I felt like he was getting a hit over and over and over again. And it was almost, I don't know how you want to say it, not shocking, but I would say it was impressive. It was kind of jaw-dropping. And every single time he was up at bat, I felt like he was going to get a hit. I was very confident that every time Randy Arozarena walked up to the plate, I had a feeling he was going to get a hit. One way or another, Randy Arozarena was going to get on base. And you go through his numbers, he had multiple games where he's getting hit after hit after hit after hit, and then you get into the World Series, he was even doing that. And I think that's what also kind of caught my attention, his ability to play in those big-time moments. In every single World Series game, you look at his numbers, he had a hit in every single World Series game except for the first game. He had 0 hits the first game, and then he follows with 1 hit, 3 hits, 1 hit, and 2 hits. So he had 6 hits to finish out the last 3 games of the World Series. If you ask me, that's not too shabby. And not to mention, he had 3 home runs in the World Series too. So he really did a lot of damage, and he was a huge part of this Rays offense. He was honestly the entire Rays offense when you think about it. I mean, they didn't really have anybody else on their entire lineup that was doing anything noteworthy. And he steps up to the plate, and he all of a sudden becomes the force that they need to be a really good team. And I think, in all honesty, they don't go as far as they do without Randy Arozarena. He was the reason why they went that far. And you look at their entire team, you go through their entire lineup. Guys like Kevin Kiermaier, I mean, he hit atrociously last year. Batted .217, had a .683 OPS. Their last 4 batters had a 710 OPS and lower. Each of the last 4 batters. The last 4 batters go in order: 667 OPS, a 683, 645, and then a 708. Barely cracking average right there, right? So, and now the middle of their lineup was really good. Brandon Lau, Willie Adames, Yandy Diaz. And yeah, I would say guys like Austin Meadows and Kevin Kiermaier should be playing way better. And Ji-Man Choi, he was pretty efficient, I would say, for the most part. Wasn't great, wasn't spectacular. But you put in guys like Randy Arozarena, and all of a sudden, he's a complete game changer. And you look at the numbers that he has in comparison to other guys that, now, he didn't play in nearly as many games as any starters did. But if you look at his numbers amongst other bench players, other utility players, I mean, they stand out clearly. He was second out of all the bench players on the Tampa Bay Rays during the season in batting average. And he was, in all honesty, he led all the utility guys in home runs as well. So he was and when he got into the playoffs, that's what I was really just, I mean, he's 25 years old. He's barely played a quarter of a season. I mean, a fraction of a season. And he's stepping up to the plate, and he's going up against the Dodgers, going up against the Astros, going up against really good teams, and all of a sudden, you're just like, whoa, this guy's, I mean, he's legit. And you think maybe for a couple games it might be a fluke, or it might be kind of he's just getting lucky. And then he does it game after game. He does it for an entire playoffs, all the way throughout the World Series, and you're just, I mean, your jaw hits the floor. Now, there are points of his game that he obviously needs to work on, clearly. I mean, you look at his numbers against righties versus lefties, it's very obvious. He struggles against righties, batting .246 in his career as opposed to .391 against lefties. So, when you think about it, when he's going up against righties, for the most part, I mean, and for the most part, you're going up against righties. That's why lefties are such a rare commodity as a pitcher in baseball. Righties, I mean, that's going to be hard. That's not a great thing for him to have. But at the same time, he can definitely get better at that. That's something that he can clearly get better at, and he can clearly improve on. And then also look at his stats going from home and away. I mean, I like to look at guys' splits because that can also tell a little bit of a deeper part of the story as to who he is as a player and just as a hitter overall and where he feels most comfortable. You get him in a situation where he's going up against lefties at home. I mean, he's batting .333 in his career at home. So you're going up against lefties at home. Good luck trying to keep him off the base path because he's going to get on base. But if he's on the road and it's against righties, he's going to really struggle. And I think that ultimately that is something that he needs to, work on, obviously. But he can also hit throughout the entire lineup. And I think that's what's so unique about him. You can put him in a multitude of different places in the lineup. You can put him as a 6-hole guy, 4-hole guy. He can do a lot. Maybe I would even lead him off. In some instances, you lead him off. I mean, he would be a great leadoff guy. He's got good OPS numbers, but I would still think that you could put him as a leadoff guy and somebody that could, get at least, again, back to my point about him being a guy that will stretch a single into a double. What more of a player would you want as a leadoff guy than somebody like that? And yeah, at times it might be risky. You might be taking a little bit of a chance, but at the same time, it could pay off. And think about it. If you got a guy that's consistently getting on second each and every single, 6 out of 10 times or 5 out of 10 times, whether he's stretching a single into a double or he beats out a really close throw at first and it gets out of the it's a wild throw away from the first baseman and he's able to advance on the throw, whatever it might be, and he can get on second consistently. Guys like Nate Lowe and Willie Adames and Kevin Kiermaier and G-Man Choi can then follow in suit Yandy Diaz and can drive him in. And they can consistently, that's how they can start games off. Now, I think that he is very, very important to his team, not with just his hitting, but his fielding, but I think also just somebody that is going to be the heartbeat of that team. When you look at that roster, I don't see anybody that jumps out to me as, yeah, that guy is a unique player. He's a very special player. Willie Adames is good. Sure. Kevin Kiermaier is good. Sure. G-Man Choi, they're all pretty good baseball players. They're all solid. I think, again, they're very comparable to the Athletics. They don't have anybody that... They've got guys that could maybe be superstars, but, I think a lot of things would have to change in their career. But they've got a lot of guys. It's a kind of a strategically built team, just through, probably analytics, low payroll, so on and so forth. Somebody like Randy Arozarena falls in your lap in an organization like the Rays. I would consider that a big win because he, I think, is going to become somebody that if they can keep for a long period of time, he can become kind of the heartbeat of that team, the heart and soul of them, and I think that's what they can then really build around. And as time goes on, they can maybe start to, trade away, trade up, try and build pieces around Randy Arozarena because they've already exposed him to a World Series. So he's already gotten that experience, and that's going to be probably very appealing to him. And he probably says, okay, I know what it's like to be in the World Series. This is pretty cool. I like playing here. I like playing for this team. I'm going to stick around for as long as I can. And then if there's that mutual agreement between the team and the player, then all of a sudden they can start going out and trading guys left and right, trading guys like G-Man Choi, or trading guys like Brandon Lau, or trading guys like Manuel Margot. Now, Manuel Margot, I think, could be a pretty good player as well. I will say, though, he doesn't throw me as somebody that would be, wow. Because Randy Arozarena, he made a lot of plays in the playoffs that it was, kind of, I don't want to say gritty, but just intense. They were very, you clearly could tell he was laying it all out there on the field, and he was not leaving anything anywhere else. And so that's what I think was very just eye-catching about him, is that he was just literally playing 150% and was not caring about he just wanted to win. And, I think that Rays team was a very unique team that got lucky. And I think that they benefited from having a guy like Randy Arozarena. Now, getting back to the original point, I know I've kind of made this huge roundabout circle and trying to, tie it all back around. Do I think that he could put up these numbers again this upcoming season? I'm going to say between buy it and deny it, I would probably go with deny it. And I'm going to explain why I go deny it. I'm going to go deny it because, in all honesty, I don't think he can put up the level of the numbers that they were at in the playoffs, because they were pretty astronomical, okay? They were pretty high. They were pretty ballooned because, again, smaller sample size. He played really good in a shorter amount of games. As a result, your stats look a little inflated, I would say. That's just me personally. That's how I kind of view it. So I do think, though, he can put up good numbers. I do think he could be a guy that this year he can have 20-plus home runs. He can have 75-plus RBIs. He can bat .270. He can have an .850. I think he can have a type of season like that. I think that's where he's going towards right now. Now, I do think eventually, as time goes on, and with a level of progression and continued work, I think that he can get to a level where, yeah, he's batting above 300. He's upwards of a 900 OPS. He's maybe knocking in 30 home runs, whatever it might be. I think he can get there eventually, 5 years down the road when he's, when he's like in his later 20s, towards his early 30s. I just don't know if he can put up that level of number again this upcoming year that he did in the playoffs, that he did in the World Series. That's just going to be really hard to repeat. So I'm going to say deny it. I don't think he's going to be at that level, but I do think he's still going to be capable of putting up good numbers. I think that he can be a 270 average guy. Even if he's batting 260 and his OPS was 875, 900, and he had 22 home runs and 85 RBIs, I would consider that a pretty good season, if you ask me. And if he kept his strikeouts low, which I know at times they kind of plague him here and there, I think that you got a guy that could be really good. I genuinely think that. I think that would be a really good season. And let me tell you what, that Rays lineup would have so much more life to it, having that a guy putting up that kind of number and those kind of numbers all throughout the season. Because I don't know if they've got a guy that can do that. Maybe somebody like Yandy Diaz, maybe somebody like Brandon Lau. I think Brandon Lau would be, Yandy Diaz and Brandon Lau would be the two I would pick. Maybe G-Man Choi if he got really lucky. But I think that ultimately Randy Arozarena is going to be a player that's going to be very, very fun to watch. Very, electrifying. That's how I would define him. He's very electrifying. He's very exciting to watch. It's exhilarating. You don't know what he's going to do. You see that infamous play. He's rounding third, trying to go home, slips and falls. The ball gets away. He goes home. He falls on the home plate. That's an incredible sequence, right? And so I think that's something that just, again, perfectly defines Rays baseball. Just kind of gritty, intense, willing to do anything to win. And that's what Randy Arozarena does. And so as a result, I think he's going to have a great career. I don't know if he's going to put up the numbers he put up last year and in the playoffs necessarily this year, but I do think he'll put up good numbers. But I'm going to ultimately go with the deny it. So, folks, again, it's been a joy. That's going to wrap it up for us here today, though. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review that really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that would also be really appreciated. And as always, everybody, thanks so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.